The morning sun cast long shadows across the landing platform of New Sol Colony. Captain Lee Dae-ho stood at attention, his dark uniform crisp despite the humid air. Sweat beaded on his forehead, but he did not move to wipe it away. Today was too important for such small gestures. Behind him, Lieutenant Park So-jin checked her equipment one final time. Her hands moved quickly over the communication devices and recording instruments. Everything had to work perfectly. The whole galaxy would be watching what happened here today. Contact in 30 seconds. Commander Jang Woo-bin called out from his position near the landing pad controls. His voice carried across the platform, steady and calm. Jang had seen many battles in his 20 years of service, but this was different. This was history. The sky above them began to shimmer. At first, it looked like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Then the shimmer grew stronger, twisting the air into strange patterns. A low humming sound filled the air, growing louder by the second. Lee felt his heart beat faster. After decades of wondering if humans were alone in the universe, today they would finally meet another intelligent species. The Valtorians had sent a message 3 months ago. They called themselves an empire that controlled hundreds of worlds. They wanted to meet the newcomers who had recently started traveling between stars. The shimmer in the sky suddenly burst into brilliant light. When the light faded, a massive ship hung in the air above them. The vessel looked like it was made of living crystal, all smooth curves and glowing edges. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Smaller ships detached from the main vessel. They moved silently through the air and settled onto the landing platform with barely a whisper. The ships had no visible engines or thrusters, yet they moved with perfect control. Lee had studied the intelligence reports. The Valtorians were taller than humans, with skin that looked like polished stone. They had 4 arms and eyes that glowed with their own inner light. Their technology was far beyond anything humans had ever seen. The nearest ship opened with a sound like wind chimes. A figure emerged from the opening, and Lee had to fight to keep his expression neutral. The alien was even more imposing than the reports had suggested. The Valtorian stood nearly 8 feet tall. Its skin was a deep purple color with veins of silver running through it like lightning. 4 muscular arms moved with fluid grace, and its eyes burned with blue fire. When it walked, each step made a soft ringing sound against the metal platform. More aliens emerged from the ships. All of them wore what looked like armor made from the same crystal material as their vessels. They carried weapons that seemed to glow with their own internal energy. The weapons had no visible barrels or moving parts, just smooth, curved shapes that hummed with power. The lead alien stepped forward and spoke. Its voice was deep and musical, but the words came through translation devices that both species had agreed to use. I am War Prime Kethvar of the Valtorian Empire. I come to meet the species that calls itself human. The alien's glowing eyes fixed on Lee. You are the military representative? Captain Lee Dae-ho representing the Earth Defense Forces, Lee replied. He kept his voice formal and respectful. Welcome to New Sol Colony. Kethvar looked around the platform, taking in the human soldiers and equipment. Lee noticed the alien's eyes lingering on the weapons the human guards carried. Standard military rifles hung from their shoulders, and sidearms rested in holsters at their hips. Your customs speak of a weapon inspection, Kethvar said. This is traditional among warrior peoples when they first meet. We show our tools of war as a sign of respect and trust. Lee nodded. He had read about this custom in the cultural briefings. Of course, Lieutenant Park will coordinate with your people. Park stepped forward with a small team of technicians. They had prepared detailed information about human weapons and their capabilities. At the same time, Valtorian soldiers began displaying their own equipment. The contrast was immediate and striking. The human weapons looked crude and simple next to the alien technology. Where human rifles were made of metal and polymer with visible mechanisms, the Valtorian weapons were smooth crystal that seemed to contain swirling energy. Where humans had bullets and magazines, the Valtorians had compact power cells that glowed like tiny stars. One of the Valtorian soldiers picked up Park's sidearm. The alien turned the weapon over in its four hands, examining it from every angle. After a moment, it began to make a sound that the translation device rendered as laughter. Chemical propulsion, the soldier said to its companions. They use explosive powder to throw metal projectiles. More Valtorian soldiers gathered around to look at the human weapons. Their laughter grew louder as they passed the firearms from hand to hand. One alien held a rifle up to the light, peering down the barrel with obvious amusement. Look at this primitive mechanism, another Valtorian said, working the rifle's bolt action. So many moving parts, so crude and inefficient. Kethvar joined the examination. The War Prime held a human pistol in one of his upper hands, weighing it thoughtfully. Kinetic projectiles, he mused. We abandoned such weapons thousands of years ago. These humans still throw rocks, essentially. Lee felt his jaw clench, but he kept his expression neutral. Behind him, he could hear some of his soldiers shifting uncomfortably. The mockery was obvious even through the translation devices. A Valtorian technician activated one of their own weapons for comparison. Energy crackled along its length, and a targeting display appeared in the air above it. Our weapons use focused plasma streams, the technician explained, though it was clearly speaking to the other aliens rather than the humans. They can adjust power levels, curve around obstacles, and self-correct for environmental factors. And they never run out of ammunition as long as the power cell functions, added another Valtorian, unlike these chemical throwers that need constant feeding of metal pellets. The Valtorians continued their examination, making comments that grew increasingly condescending. They spoke about human weapons like museum pieces, interesting relics, from a more primitive time. Perhaps we should offer them some real weapons, one soldier suggested, as a gesture of goodwill between our peoples. Yes, agreed another. We could upgrade their entire military, bring them into the modern age of warfare. Kethvar set the human pistol down on the examination table with careful precision. These weapons might have been effective against other primitive species, he said, but they would be useless against any truly advanced enemy. The War Prime turned to address Lee directly. Captain, your people show courage in venturing into space with such limited resources. The Empire respects bravery even when it is misguided. Lee felt heat rise in his cheeks, but his voice remained steady. Our weapons have served us well, War Prime. I am sure they have. Against enemies of similar technological level, Kethvar replied. But the galaxy is vast and dangerous. There are threats out here that your metal projectiles could never hope to stop. The Valtorian soldiers began packing up their own weapons. The demonstration was clearly over in their minds. They had shown their advanced technology and found human equipment to be laughably primitive. As the aliens secured their equipment, Lee could hear them continuing to comment among themselves. The translation devices picked up fragments of their conversation. Chemical explosives in the modern age, like bringing clubs to a plasma fight. Wonder how they survived long enough to reach space. Commander Jang stepped close to Lee. Sir, should we respond to their comments? Lee shook his head slightly. Maintain diplomatic protocol, he said quietly. Let them underestimate us. Park rejoined them after finishing her technical discussions with the Valtorian engineers. Her face was carefully neutral, but Lee could see the frustration in her eyes. They offered to upgrade our primitive systems with their technology, she reported in a low voice, as a charitable gift to help us defend ourselves. How generous of them, Lee replied dryly. Kethvar approached their group again. Captain Lee, the Empire looks forward to continuing these discussions. Your species shows promise despite your technological limitations. With proper guidance, humanity could become a valued member of our alliance. We appreciate the Empire's interest, Lee responded diplomatically. As the Valtorians prepared to return to their ships, Lee watched them carefully. They moved with the confidence of a people who had never faced a serious challenge. Their weapons were undoubtedly powerful, their technology far beyond human capabilities. But Lee had seen something in their examination that the aliens had missed. They had focused entirely on the sophistication of their own equipment while dismissing human weapons as primitive. They never asked about effectiveness, about results, about what human weapons could actually accomplish. The Valtorians saw complexity and assumed superiority. They saw simple mechanisms and assumed weakness. It was an assumption that might cost them dearly. As the alien ships lifted silently into the sky, Lee turned to his officers. "What do you think, Commander?" Jang watched the ships disappear into the distance. "I think they've made a dangerous mistake, sir." "Which is?" They confused. "Advanced with effective." Lee nodded slowly. The Valtorians had shown their hand completely. 3 weeks had passed since the first meeting, and the Valtorian delegation had settled into temporary quarters on New Sol. What had started as polite diplomatic talks was slowly turning into something more tense and uncomfortable. Captain Lee Dae-ho sat in the briefing room, reviewing reports from the ongoing negotiations. Trade agreements that should have been simple were becoming complicated. The Valtorians kept suggesting that humanity needed their protection rather than their partnership. "They're treating us like children," Commander Jang Woo-bin said, setting down his tablet with frustration. "Every proposal includes some form of Valtorian oversight or guidance." Lieutenant Park So-jin looked up from her technical manuals. "Their engineers keep offering to fix our equipment. They act like they're doing us a favor by even talking to us." Lee rubbed his temples. The diplomatic situation was getting worse each day. The Valtorians weren't openly hostile, but their attitude was clear. They saw humans as a primitive species that needed guidance and protection. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Sergeant Kim Tae-young entered the room, followed by Corporal Yoon Hana. Both soldiers looked tired but alert. "Sir, we need to discuss the joint exercise scheduled for tomorrow," Kim said. He was a lean man with steady hands and sharp eyes. His reputation as a marksman was known throughout the human forces. "What about it, Sergeant?" Lee asked. "The Valtorians have been making changes to the exercise parameters," Yoon reported. She was responsible for communications during joint operations. "They keep suggesting modifications that would make their equipment look better." Lee frowned. The joint exercise had been planned as a way for both species to show their military capabilities. It was supposed to build trust and understanding between their forces. "What kind of changes?" Jang asked. "They want to use scenarios that favor energy weapons," Kim explained. "Long-range targets in open areas where their plasma rifles work best." They also suggested using their combat simulators instead of live fire exercises. "Let me guess," Park said. "Their simulators are programmed with their technology in mind." "Exactly," Yoon confirmed. "When we asked to review the simulation parameters, they said it would be too complicated for us to understand." Lee felt his anger rising but kept his voice calm. "Have they made any other suggestions?" "Yes, sir," Kim continued. "They offered to let us borrow their weapons for the exercise. They said it would be more fair if both sides used equivalent equipment." "More fair," Jang repeated with obvious sarcasm. "How thoughtful of them." The briefing was interrupted by an alarm from Yoon's communication device. She quickly checked the incoming message and her face grew serious. "Sir, there's been an incident at the equipment storage facility," she reported. "Some of our gear has malfunctioned." Lee stood immediately. "What kind of malfunction?" "Multiple systems, sir. Targeting computers, communications equipment, and several rifle scopes. All the advanced electronics we were planning to use in tomorrow's exercise." The group hurried to the storage facility. Inside, human technicians were examining damaged equipment. The electronics that had failed all showed the same type of damage, fried circuits that looked like they had been hit by some kind of energy pulse. "This wasn't an accident," Park said after examining several pieces. "These circuits were deliberately overloaded." "Can you prove it?" Lee asked. Park held up a damaged targeting scope. "The pattern is too consistent. Natural failure would be random, but every piece failed in exactly the same way. Someone used an energy weapon to fry our electronics." Jang's face darkened. "The Valtorians." "We can't prove that," Lee said carefully. But privately, he had no doubt about who was responsible. A new voice interrupted their discussion. "Is there a problem with your equipment?" They turned to see Sub-Commander Thexlon, one of the Valtorian officers who had been observing the exercise preparations. The alien's glowing eyes looked concerned, but Lee detected something else in the expression. "Some of our equipment has failed," Lee replied neutrally. "We're investigating the cause." Thexlon examined the damaged gear with obvious interest. "How unfortunate. Electronic equipment can be so unreliable, especially when it's built with primitive technology." Lee felt his jaw clench. The Valtorian's tone was sympathetic, but the words were clearly meant as an insult. "Perhaps this is a sign," Thexlon continued. "Your equipment fails when you need it most. This is why the Empire believes you need our protection. Our weapons never fail. Our equipment has served us well for many years," Kim said quietly. His voice was respectful but firm. "I'm sure it has, against other primitive enemies," Thexlon replied. "But surely you can see that you need more reliable technology. We would be happy to provide you with proper weapons for tomorrow's exercise." "That's very generous," Lee said diplomatically. "But we prefer to use our own equipment." Thexlon's expression showed what might have been amusement. "Even when it doesn't work?" "We'll make do with what we have," Lee replied. The Valtorian officer looked around at the damaged equipment, then back at the human soldiers. Something in his posture suggested he was making a decision. "Captain Lee," Thexlon said formally, "I have a proposal. I'm listening. Tomorrow's exercise has become pointless. Your equipment has failed, and borrowing ours would not provide a fair comparison. Instead, I suggest a different kind of demonstration." Lee waited for the alien to continue. "A marksmanship contest?" Thexlon said. "Pure skill against skill. My best marksman against yours. We use our own weapons, our own methods. Let the results speak for themselves." "What would be the point of such a contest?" Jang asked. Thexlon's eyes glowed brighter. "To settle the question of military effectiveness once and for all. If your weapons are truly adequate, your soldiers should be able to demonstrate their capability. And if we refuse?" Lee asked. "Then everyone will know that humans lack confidence in their own abilities," Thexlon replied. "That they prefer to hide behind diplomatic words rather than prove their worth." Lee realized this was a trap. The Valtorians had sabotaged human equipment, then offered a contest they were sure they could win. If humans refused, they would look weak. If they accepted, they would be fighting with weapons the Valtorians had already dismissed as primitive. But there was something else in the situation that Thexlon had overlooked. The Valtorian was so confident in his technology that he wasn't considering human skill or determination. "What would be the stakes of this contest?" Lee asked. "Simple," Thexlon replied. "If we win, humanity acknowledges that Valtorian weapons are superior and accepts the Empire's guidance in military matters. If you win—" The alien paused, as if the possibility was too unlikely to consider. "If you win, we will acknowledge human military competence." Lee looked at his officers. Kim gave a small nod. Yoon looked determined. Park seemed eager to see what would happen. Jang's expression was unreadable. "We accept," Lee said finally. Thexlon's eyes flashed with what looked like satisfaction. "Excellent. We will arrange the contest for tomorrow morning. Both species' media representatives will be invited to witness the demonstration." After the Valtorian left, Jang moved close to Lee. "Sir, are you sure about this?" "They sabotaged our equipment to force this exact situation," Lee replied quietly. "They want to humiliate us in front of the galaxy." "Their weapons are more advanced than ours," Park pointed out. "They have targeting computers and energy projectiles that can curve around obstacles." "But they don't understand what our weapons can really do," Kim said thoughtfully. "They think primitive means ineffective." Lee nodded. "They've made the same mistake many enemies have made. They've confused technology with ability." "What's our strategy?" Yoon asked. "We show them what human weapons were designed to do," Lee replied. "Not compete with their technology, but accomplish our mission despite it." That evening, Lee met privately with Kim and two other experienced marksmen. Master Sergeant Oh Jin Woo had 30 years of experience and had never missed a shot that mattered. Private First Class Lim Yu-jin was young but had a natural talent that impressed even veteran soldiers. "What do you think our chances are?" Lee asked them. "Against their technology?" "Poor," Oh replied honestly. "Their weapons have built-in targeting systems and can adjust trajectory in flight. But they've never faced real opposition," Kim added. "They've been using those advanced weapons against enemies who had similar technology. Energy shields, sophisticated armor, electronic countermeasures. Our weapons were designed for a different kind of war," Lim said quietly. "We built them to kill anything that bleeds, regardless of what technology it has." Lee smiled grimly. The young soldier had understood something that the Valtorians had missed completely. "Get some rest," he told them. "Tomorrow we show the galaxy what human weapons can really do." As his soldiers left, Lee looked out the window at the Valtorian ships glowing in the darkness. The aliens were so confident in their superiority that they had broadcast their challenge across multiple star systems. Representatives from dozens of species would witness tomorrow's contest. The Valtorians expected an easy victory that would establish their dominance over humanity. They had no idea what they were about to face. Lee had seen human weapons in action against every kind of enemy imaginable. The morning air was crisp and still as representatives from dozens of species gathered at the neutral zone between human and Valtorian territory. Captain Lee Dae-ho stood with his team, watching the elaborate setup that had been prepared for the contest. The Valtorians had spared no effort in making this a public spectacle. Floating camera drones from multiple news agencies circled overhead. Viewing platforms had been constructed for the diplomatic observers. Energy barriers protected the audience areas while providing perfect views of the firing range. Sub-Commander Thexlon approached with a group of Valtorian marksmen. Each alien soldier carried weapons that gleamed with internal energy. Their armor was polished to mirror brightness, and their forearms moved with mechanical precision. "Captain Lee," Thexlon said formally, "I present the finest marksmen of the Valtorian Empire. Warriors who have never missed their target in over 100 campaigns." Lee looked at the alien soldiers. They stood with absolute confidence, their glowing eyes fixed on the human team with what looked like pity. Behind them, more Valtorians had gathered to watch their assured victory. "These are my marksmen," Lee replied, indicating his own team. "Sergeant Kim Tae-young, Master Sergeant Oh Jin-woo, and Private First Class Lim Yu-jin." The three humans looked ordinary compared to the imposing aliens. Their uniforms were standard military issue, their weapons simple metal and polymer constructions. But Lee noticed something in their posture that the Valtorians missed completely. His soldiers were calm, relaxed, ready. "Let us review the contest parameters," announced the neutral arbiter, a representative from the Galactic Mediation Council. "Each side will attempt 3 different marksmanship challenges: standard accuracy, precision targeting, and combat simulation. The first challenge began with targets at increasing distances, simple circular targets, black centers on white backgrounds arranged from 100 meters to 1,000 meters. The Valtorian marksman stepped to the firing line. His weapon hummed with power as he raised it to his shoulder. The rifle had no visible scope, but holographic targeting displays appeared in the air around the barrel. Energy readings scrolled across small screens built into the weapon's stock. "Impressive technology," Park whispered to Lee. "The rifle is calculating wind speed, humidity, and target movement automatically." The Valtorian fired. A beam of coherent plasma streaked toward the target, leaving a brief trail of ionized air. The shot struck the center of the 100-meter target with perfect precision. The alien moved to the next target without pause, his weapon adjusting its settings automatically. Each shot was flawless. The plasma beam struck exactly where the targeting computer predicted they would. At 500 meters, the alien's shots grouped within a circle smaller than a coin. At 1,000 meters, his accuracy was still perfect. The Valtorian spectators made sounds of approval. Several alien news correspondents focused their cameras on the smoking remains of the targets, all showing identical precision hits. "Your turn," Thexlon said to the humans. His tone suggested this was merely a formality. Sergeant Kim stepped to the firing line. He carried a standard military rifle, the same model that the Valtorians had laughed at during their first meeting. The weapon had iron sights and a simple scope. No computers, no targeting displays, no automatic adjustments. Kim checked his rifle quickly, working the bolt to chamber around. The action made mechanical clicking sounds that seemed primitive compared to the silent operation of Valtorian weapons. He raised the rifle to his shoulder and looked through the scope. For several seconds, Kim remained motionless. He was reading the wind, gauging the light, making calculations in his head that the Valtorian weapon had done automatically. Then he fired. The gunshot was sharp and loud, echoing across the range. Chemical propellants exploded, driving a metal projectile down a rifled barrel at supersonic speed. There were no energy readings, no holographic displays, no computer assistance. Just physics and skill. The bullet struck the 100-meter target dead center. A few Valtorians made dismissive sounds. One hit meant nothing when their marksman had achieved perfect accuracy on every shot. Kim worked his bolt again, ejecting the spent cartridge and chambering a new round. He aimed at the 200-meter target and fired. Another perfect hit. He continued methodically through all the distances, his shots grouping just as precisely as the Valtorians. But when Kim reached the 1,000-meter target, something different happened. The human's bullet didn't just hit the center of the target, it destroyed it completely. Where the Valtorian's plasma beam had burned a neat hole, Kim's bullet had torn through the target with such violent force that the entire center section was gone. The target fluttered in tatters, held together only by its outer edges. What happened? One Valtorian observer asked. Kinetic energy transfer, Park explained to anyone listening. The bullet didn't just hit the target, it delivered all its momentum at once. The Valtorian marksman looked confused. His weapon had been more accurate, more sophisticated, more technologically advanced, but the result was somehow less impressive than the human's simple metal projectile. The second challenge involved precision targeting. Small objects placed at various distances, some partially concealed behind barriers, others moving on mechanical tracks. The Valtorian weapon proved its sophistication again. Its plasma beams could curve around obstacles, following programmed flight paths to strike targets that weren't in direct line of sight. The energy projectiles adjusted their course mid-flight, compensating for target movement and environmental factors. It was a masterful display of advanced technology. The Valtorian marksman hit every target, even those that seemed impossible to reach with conventional weapons. Master Sergeant Oh Jin-woo took his position for the human team. He was older than the other marksmen, with gray hair and weathered hands. His rifle was even more basic than Kim's, with no scope at all, just simple iron sights. This is ridiculous, one Valtorian muttered. How can he hope to hit targets he cannot even see directly? Oh ignored the comments. He studied the course carefully, noting the positions of barriers and the timing of moving targets. Then he began to fire. His first shot ricocheted off a metal plate, bounced at precisely the right angle, and struck a target hidden behind a concrete barrier. The Valtorians fell silent, surprised by the unexpected tactics. Oh's second shot went through a narrow gap between two obstacles, threading a path that seemed impossible to calculate. His third shot led a moving target perfectly, striking it at the exact moment it emerged from cover. He's using geometry, one of the alien technical observers noted with surprise. Calculating angles and timing without computer assistance. Impossible, another Valtorian replied. No biological mind could make those calculations that quickly. But Oh continued hitting targets that should have been unreachable. Where the Valtorian weapon used sophisticated guidance systems to curve its shots, Oh used his understanding of physics to bounce his bullets off surfaces, thread them through gaps, and time them perfectly with moving objects. The difference in approach was becoming clear. The Valtorian weapon relied on technology to overcome obstacles. The human marksman used skill and knowledge to work with the environment. The third challenge was combat simulation. Multiple targets would appear at random intervals, some hostile and some neutral. Marksmen had to identify threats quickly and engage them while avoiding civilian casualties. The simulation began, and targets popped up across the range. Some were clearly marked as enemies, others as innocent bystanders. The challenge was to respond quickly while making correct identifications. The Valtorian marksman performed flawlessly. His weapon's targeting system identified threats instantly, and his plasma beam struck each hostile target with computer-perfect precision. His reaction time was enhanced by technological assistance, and he never hesitated or missed. When the simulation ended, the Valtorian had achieved a perfect score. Every hostile target eliminated, every civilian protected, every shot placed exactly where it needed to be. Impossible to improve upon, Thexelon announced proudly. Advanced technology and superior training produce perfect results. Private First, Class Lim Yu-jin stepped forward for the human team. She was the youngest of the marksmen, barely 20 years old. Her rifle was standard issue, identical to the others, with no special modifications or enhancements. The simulation began again. Targets appeared in the same pattern at the same intervals with the same identifications. Lim's response was different from the Valtorians in every way. Where the alien had relied on his weapon's computer to identify targets, Lim made her own decisions. Where the alien had fired precisely calculated shots, Lim fired instinctively. But something extraordinary happened. Lim didn't just hit the hostile targets, she ended the threats completely. Her first shot struck an enemy target and continued through it to hit a second target behind it. 1 bullet, 2 kills. Her second shot ricocheted off a barrier and took out a sniper target that hadn't even been visible when she fired. The Valtorians watched in growing amazement as Lim systematically destroyed every threat on the range. But she wasn't just matching the alien's perfect score. She was exceeding it. A target popped up that was designed to test decision-making. The silence stretched across the firing range as everyone tried to understand what they had just witnessed. Captain Lee Dae-ho watched the Valtorian delegation gather around their sub-commander, their glowing eyes reflecting confusion and concern. War Prime. Kethvar arrived at the range, having been summoned by urgent communications from his subordinates. The tall alien moved through the crowd of observers, his crystalline armor catching the sunlight as he approached the firing line. "Report," Kethvar commanded, his musical voice carrying clearly across the area. Thexelon gestured toward the destroyed targets. "The humans. Their weapons performed differently than we expected." Kethvar examined the evidence. Where Valtorian plasma beams had left neat, precise holes, human bullets had created massive damage. Targets were shredded, barriers were cracked, and metal backing plates were bent from the sheer force of impact. "Explain this," Kethvar said. Engineer Choi Min-ho stepped forward from the human technical team. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke during diplomatic meetings, but his expertise in ballistics was unmatched. "War Prime, if I may," Choi said respectfully. "The difference lies in our fundamental approach to projectile weapons." Kethvar's four arms gestured for him to continue. "Your energy weapons are highly sophisticated," Choi explained. "They deliver precise amounts of energy exactly where you want them. Very clean, very efficient, very controllable." "As weapons should be," Kethvar replied. "Yes, for certain types of warfare," Choi agreed. "But our weapons operate on different principles. We don't focus energy, we transfer kinetic force." Dr. Nam Yunji joined the explanation. She carried a tablet displaying ballistics calculations and energy transfer equations. A human bullet doesn't just reach its target, it delivers all of its momentum at once. "Momentum?" one of the Valtorian engineers asked. "Mass times velocity," Nam replied. "Our bullets are dense metal projectiles moving at supersonic speeds. When they hit something, all that kinetic energy has to go somewhere." She activated a holographic display that showed the physics involved. "Your plasma beam delivers energy over time, burning through targets gradually. Our bullet delivers energy instantly, creating massive trauma to the target structure." Kethvar studied the display with growing interest. "You are saying your primitive weapons actually deliver more destructive force?" "Not more force," Choi corrected. "Different force. Your weapons are designed to overcome technological defenses like energy shields and advanced armor. Our weapons are designed to destroy organic targets regardless of their technological protection. Lieutenant. Park So-jin activated her recording equipment to show footage from the contest. The video played in slow motion, showing the impact of different weapons on identical targets. Watch the Valtorian plasma beam, Park narrated. It burns through the target material, creating a clean hole. Very precise, very controlled. The footage switched to show a human bullet impact. Now watch our projectile. The bullet doesn't just penetrate. It transfers massive kinetic energy to the entire target structure. The slow-motion video was startling. The bullet struck the target and immediately began transferring its momentum. The target material didn't just burn or melt, it exploded outward. From the point of impact, torn apart by forces that the Valtorians hadn't considered. The energy transfer is instantaneous, Nam explained. There's no time for the target to adapt or compensate. The kinetic force simply overwhelms whatever it encounters. A Valtorian technical officer raised one of his 4 hands. But surely this makes your weapons less precise, more likely to cause unintended damage? Master Sergeant Oh Jin-woo smiled, grimly. That depends on your definition of intended damage. Our weapons were designed for a different kind of war, Captain Lee added. We didn't have energy shields or advanced armor to worry about. We needed weapons that could stop any organic threat, immediately and permanently. Kethavar looked thoughtful. You developed weapons to kill biological entities, not to overcome technology. Exactly, Lee confirmed. Kinetic energy doesn't care about your technological advantages. Physics is physics. Mass times velocity squared. It works the same way regardless of what armor you're wearing or what shields you're carrying. Dr. Nam activated another display, showing comparative energy calculations. A Valtorian plasma beam delivers approximately 50 kilojoules of energy to its target. Very impressive for an energy weapon. And your projectiles? Kethavar asked. A standard human rifle bullet delivers about 3,000 joules of kinetic energy, Nam replied. Several Valtorians made dismissive sounds. Their weapons delivered significantly more energy. But, Nam continued, our energy is delivered as kinetic force, not heat, and kinetic energy transfer is fundamentally different from thermal energy transfer. She showed comparative footage of both weapons firing at armored targets. Your plasma beam heats the armor until it melts or burns through. Our bullet transfers kinetic energy instantly, creating structural failure throughout the target. The video was dramatic. The Valtorian weapon slowly burned through advanced armor plating, creating a neat hole that sealed itself as the molten metal cooled. The human weapon struck the same type of armor and instantly created spiderweb cracks that spread across the entire surface. The armor isn't just penetrated, Choi explained. It's structurally compromised. A single bullet impact can weaken an entire armor plate. Furthermore, Park added, our weapons function regardless of technological interference. Electromagnetic pulses, energy dampening fields, shield generators, none of those affect a kinetic projectile. She activated a demonstration device that generated a strong electromagnetic field. This would disable most energy weapons. A Valtorian plasma rifle powered down immediately when brought near the field. Park then fired a human pistol through the same electromagnetic interference. The bullet passed through, completely unaffected. Chemical propellants don't care about energy fields, she said simply. Metal projectiles don't need power sources. Our weapons work in any environment, against any target, regardless of their technological countermeasures. Kethavar was quiet for a long moment, studying the evidence. Finally, he spoke to his own technical staff. Run combat simulations. Model kinetic projectile impacts against our standard armor and shielding. The Valtorian engineers worked quickly with their portable computers. Within minutes, they had results that clearly disturbed them. War Prime, one engineer reported quietly. Human projectiles would penetrate our personal armor completely. Our energy shields are designed to deflect or absorb energy weapons, not solid matter moving at high velocity. What about our vehicle armor? Kethavar asked. Significant damage, sir. The kinetic energy transfer would create structural failures even if the projectiles didn't fully penetrate. Kethvar turned back to the humans. Your weapons would be effective against Valtorian forces. They would be effective against any forces, Lee replied. That's why we built them this way. But surely you understand that your weapons are still primitive compared to ours, Thexelon interjected. We have targeting computers, trajectory adjustment, power level controls. Sergeant Kim stepped forward. Subcommander, may I demonstrate something? Thexelon nodded. Kim picked up his rifle and aimed it at a distant target. Your weapon can adjust its shot in flight, correct? Yes. Our plasma beams can curve around obstacles and compensate for environmental factors. What if the environment changes after you fire? Kim asked. Before Thexelon could answer, Kim pulled the trigger. His bullet streaked toward a target 500 meters away. At the same moment, Park activated a device that generated a strong wind gust across the range. The bullet arrived at the target before the wind could affect it. It struck dead center, completely unaffected by the environmental change. Our bullets travel faster than most environmental factors can influence them, Kim explained. By the time conditions change, our projectile has already reached its target. Kim aimed at another target, this one partially concealed behind a barrier. Your weapon would calculate a curved flight path to reach this target. Correct, Thexelon. Confirmed. Kim fired again. His bullet struck the edge of the barrier and ricocheted at a precise angle, striking the concealed target with devastating force. We don't need our weapons to be smart, Kim said. We make ourselves smart and let physics do the work. The demonstration was having a visible effect on the Valtorian delegation. Their confidence was shaken as they realized that their technological advantages might not be as decisive as they had assumed. There's something else you should consider, Dr. Nam said. Your energy weapons require sophisticated technology to function. Complex power systems, precision components, advanced materials. Yes, Kethvar said. This allows us to achieve superior performance. But what happens when that technology fails? Nam asked. What happens in extreme environments? Or when you face enemies who can disrupt electronic systems? She gestured toward the human weapons. Our weapons are mechanical. They function in vacuum, underwater, in extreme temperatures, in electromagnetic interference. They work when everything else fails. Primitive construction means reliable operation, Choi added. We can manufacture ammunition from basic materials. We can maintain our weapons with simple tools. We can operate them without power sources or computer support. 2 days after the marksmanship contest, Captain Lee Dae-ho was reviewing diplomatic reports when the emergency alarms began sounding across New Seoul Colony. The harsh wailing meant only one thing: incoming hostile forces. All hands to battle. Stations, Commander Jang Woo-bin announced over the communication system. This is not a drill. Unknown vessels approaching the system. Lee rushed to the command center where Lieutenant Park So-jin was coordinating with both human and Valtorian forces. The contest had changed the relationship between the two species, creating a new sense of mutual respect, but now they faced a common threat. Report, Lee demanded as he entered the command center. Multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace, Park reported. Configuration unknown, but they're not responding to communication attempts. Colonel Bae Sung-ho, the overall human military commander, appeared on the main screen from his flagship in orbit. Captain, we've got 27 hostile vessels moving toward the planet. The Valtorians are identifying them as Korthak raiders. Lee felt his blood run cold. He had heard of the Korthaks from intelligence reports. They were a savage species that attacked both human and Valtorian space, taking what they wanted and destroying everything else. War Prime Kethvar entered the command center, his crystalline armor gleaming with battle readiness. Captain Lee, the Korthak fleet is larger than anything we have faced before. We must coordinate our defenses. Agreed, Lee replied. What are we looking at? Major Shin Hee-young, who specialized in coordinating joint operations, activated the tactical display. The Korthaks are using adaptive technology. Their shields adjust to counter whatever weapons are used against them. Our plasma weapons were effective against them in previous encounters, Kethvar explained. But each battle they become more resistant to our energy attacks. On the display, The Korthak ships looked like metallic insects, all sharp angles and predatory curves. They moved in coordinated swarms, their hulls shifting and changing as they approached the planet. "How long do we have?" Lee asked. 18 minutes until they reach firing range, Shin reported. "Our combined fleets should be sufficient," Kethvar said, but his tone suggested uncertainty. "The Valtorian ships have engaged Korthak raiders many times." "What was the outcome of those encounters?" Jang asked. Kethvar hesitated. "We have achieved tactical victories, but at significant cost. The Korthaks adapt quickly to our weapon systems." The first phase of the battle began in space above New Sol. Human and Valtorian warships moved to intercept the Korthak raiders. Lee watched the tactical display as energy weapons from both Allied fleets struck the enemy vessels. The initial results seemed promising. Valtorian plasma cannons tore into Korthak shields, and human missile systems found their targets. But as the battle continued, something disturbing became apparent. "Their shields are adapting," Park reported with growing concern. "Valtorian energy weapons are becoming less effective with each hit." On the display, Lee could see the Korthak ships adjusting their defensive systems in real time. Where the first plasma blasts had caused significant damage, subsequent hits were having diminished effects. "This is how they operate," Kethvar explained grimly. "Their technology learns from each attack and develops countermeasures." "What about our missiles?" Lee asked. "Still effective," Colonel Bay reported from orbit. "But they're adjusting to those too. We need something they can't adapt to." Lee felt a moment of inspiration. "What about kinetic weapons? Do we have any ship-mounted railguns?" "The heavy cruiser Incheon has experimental railgun systems," Bay replied. "But they were designed for testing, not combat." "Get them into the fight," Lee ordered. "Now." On the tactical display, the human cruiser moved into firing position. The railgun systems were massive electromagnetic launchers that accelerated metal projectiles to incredible velocities. The first railgun shot streaked across space at a significant fraction of light speed. The metal projectile struck a Korthak raider with devastating results. The enemy ship didn't just take damage. It was destroyed completely, torn apart by kinetic energy that its adaptive shields couldn't counter. "Impossible," one of the Valtorian observers said. "The Korthaks have never been destroyed so easily. Their shields adapt to energy signatures," Lee explained. "But they can't adapt to raw kinetic force. Physics doesn't change." More human ships joined the attack with whatever kinetic weapons they could bring to bear. Mass drivers, electromagnetic, launchers, even simple missiles that relied on impact rather than explosive warheads. The results were dramatic. Where Valtorian energy weapons were becoming less effective as the battle progressed, human kinetic weapons remained constant in their destructive power. "The Korthaks are retreating," Shin reported with amazement. "They're actually pulling back." But the victory was short-lived. The Korthak fleet regrouped at the edge of the system and began a new approach. This time they were heading directly for the planet's surface. "Ground assault," Kethvar said. "They cannot adapt our defenses in space, so they will try to take the colony directly." "How many troops are they landing?" Lee asked. "Preliminary scans show at least 10,000 Korthak warriors," Park reported. "They're using drop pods and assault shuttles." Lee activated the colony-wide communication system. "All defensive units to combat positions. This is Captain Lee. The Korthaks are coming to us." Sergeant Kim Tae-young appeared on the communication, screen from the outer defensive line. "Sir, we're seeing their ground forces now. They have personal energy shields and adaptive armor." "Same principle as their ships?" Lee asked. "Appears so, sir. They're designed to counter energy weapons." Lee smiled grimly. "Then we give them something they can't counter. Break out the anti-material rifles." The weapons armory of New Sol contained equipment that hadn't been used since the early colonial conflicts. Heavy kinetic weapons designed to stop anything that moved regardless of its technological protection. Master Sergeant Oh Jin-woo took position with a rifle that was nearly as tall as he was. The weapon fired projectiles the size of small missiles, accelerated by chemical propellants to devastating velocities. "Contact," Oh reported calmly. "Korthak warriors advancing on Sector 7. The first Korthak troops to reach the human defensive line were massive creatures in powered armor. Their personal shields flickered with adaptive energy, ready to counter whatever weapons the defenders might use. O took aim and fired. The sound was like thunder. The massive bullet streaked across the battlefield and struck the leading Korthak warrior center mass. The result was instantaneous and complete. The Korthak's adaptive shields had no effect against the kinetic projectile. The warrior was killed immediately, his armor and shields useless against the raw physics of the impact. Confirmed kill, O reported. Moving to next target. Across the battlefield, human defenders opened fire with kinetic weapons of every description. Rifles, machine guns, anti-material weapons, even some improvised projectile launchers. The Korthaks had never faced anything like it. Their adaptive technology, which had made them nearly invincible against energy weapons, was completely useless against metal projectiles moving at high velocity. "They're falling back," Kim reported with satisfaction. "The Korthaks are actually retreating." Private First Class Lim Yu-jin had taken position with a heavy machine gun. Her targets were Korthak assault vehicles that had been designed to counter plasma weapons and particle beams. Her first burst of fire walked across the front of an armored transport. The kinetic energy of the bullets didn't just penetrate the armor. It shattered the structural integrity of the entire vehicle. The transport collapsed in on itself, its adaptive defenses useless against simple metal projectiles. "This is incredible," Corporal Yoon Ha-na reported from her communication post. "The Korthaks are sending distress signals. They're calling for immediate evacuation." The battle turned into a rout. Korthak forces that had never been decisively defeated were fleeing from human kinetic weapons. Their adaptive technology, their sophisticated defenses, their superior numbers, none of it mattered against weapons that relied on basic physics rather than advanced technology. From orbit, Colonel Bay continued the space battle with railguns and mass drivers. Korthak ships that had previously required concentrated fire from multiple Valtorian vessels were being destroyed with single kinetic strikes. "War Prime," Lee called to Kethvar, who had been observing the battle with obvious amazement. "Your fleet should coordinate with our kinetic weapons. Use your energy weapons to force them into position for our railgun strikes." "Understood," Kethvar replied. This is the first time anyone has driven off a major Korthak assault." The battle continued for 3 more hours, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Korthaks, faced with weapons they couldn't adapt, to finally abandon their attack and fled the system completely. As the all-clear signal sounded across New Seoul, Lee found himself standing with Kethvar on the observation deck of the command center. The Valtorian War Prime was studying the battlefield reports with obvious fascination. "Captain Lee," Kethvar said finally, "I owe you an apology." "War Prime? We mocked your weapons because we didn't understand them. We thought advancement meant complexity, sophistication, technological superiority." Kethvar gestured toward the tactical displays showing the aftermath of the battle.